Sweeping aerial shots of the European theater, clouds below, sunlight glinting off P-51 Mustangs, the roar of a P-51 Mustang engine was more than a sound, it was a herald of fear, a pulse that raced through the veins of Luftwaffe pilots across Europe, a warning that the skies they had once dominated with precision and pride were no longer theirs to command. And for the first time, German aces found themselves facing an enemy whose capabilities defied expectations and shattered conventional wisdom about aerial warfare. Because the Mustang was not simply a fighter plane, it was an engineered phenomenon, a perfect blend of speed, agility, range, and firepower that combined to create an almost mythical predator in the sky, one capable of dictating the flow of combat, controlling engagements, and instilling an acute sense of dread in anyone who dared face it. And this fear was compounded not just by the aircraft's performance, but by the tactical genius of the pilots who flew it, men trained to exploit every advantage, coordinate seamlessly with bombers, and strike with lethal precision before vanishing into the clouds, leaving German pilots scrambling to respond to maneuvers they had never anticipated. And as early as late 1943, when the first Mustangs began escorting B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators on deep penetration raids into Germany, the Luftwaffe quickly realized that these American fighters were unlike anything they had encountered, because previous Allied escorts, such as Spitfires and P-38 Lightnings, lacked the range and sustained high-altitude performance to protect bombers over Central Europe, and their absence had cost hundreds of lives in devastating bomber losses. But the Mustang changed the calculus entirely, turning escort missions into near-impenetrable shields for Allied bombers while simultaneously acting as hunters, diving from above, flanking, and engaging enemy aircraft with a combination of aggression and precision that left German pilots disoriented and often overmatched. And it was this relentless combination of endurance and tactical flexibility that earned the Mustang a reputation among German aces as both deadly and unpredictable, because even the most experienced pilots could not rely on standard dogfighting techniques against a machine that could climb faster, turn tighter, and sustain high-speed maneuvers longer than almost any other contemporary aircraft. And when combined with the devastating firepower of 6.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, which could tear through fuselage, wings, and defensive turrets alike, the Mustang became a weapon that inspired fear not only for what it could do to the aircraft, but for the psychological effect it had on pilots forced to fight against it, who often hesitated, miscalculated, or panicked under pressure. And in aerial warfare, hesitation was death, because one split-second error at 30,000 feet could send a fighter plummeting into the earth below, leaving the pilot either dead or captured. And this knowledge weighed heavily on Luftwaffe aces who prided themselves on courage, skill, and precision, because every encounter with a Mustang became a contest not just of skill, but of nerves, reaction time, and endurance. And German pilots reported that the sight of a Mustang banking sharply above a formation of bombers was enough to break morale before a single shot was fired. And the combination of high-altitude performance, long range, and maneuverability meant that these American fighters could escort bombers all the way to Berlin, far beyond the reach of previous Allied escorts, and still have enough fuel and ammunition to engage Luftwaffe interceptors, who found themselves drawn into battles under conditions they had not prepared for, fighting an enemy that could strike from any angle, evade counters, and coordinate in ways that disrupted every defensive plan. And it was in these encounters, over the skies of Germany, France, and the Low Countries, that the Mustang earned its fearsome reputation, as German aces discovered that no matter how experienced, how cunning, or how well-trained they were, surviving a fight against a well-flown Mustang required more than skill. It required luck, timing, and nerves of steel, because the Mustang forced the Luftwaffe to rethink dogfighting entirely, changing tactics, formations, and engagement strategies. And pilots who had previously considered themselves masters of the air found themselves overmatched, outmaneuvered, and psychologically pressured in ways they had never imagined. And every bomber escorted safely by Mustangs reinforced the legend, as each deep penetration raid succeeded where prior missions had failed, proving that the aircraft and its pilots could sustain long campaigns, counter highly trained German aces, and dominate the skies with terrifying consistency. And the fact that the Mustang was not only effective but also reliable in varied weather conditions, from clear skies to heavy cloud cover, added another layer of threat, because Luftwaffe pilots could no longer predict engagements based on altitude, visibility, or timing, knowing that a Mustang could appear anywhere, at any moment, and change the course of a battle in seconds. And as the war progressed, Accounts from both Allied and Axis pilots confirmed that the Mustang's performance at altitudes above 30,000 feet, combined with roll rates, climb rates, and dive speeds, made it a nightmare for interceptors relying on traditional tactics, forcing the Luftwaffe into a defensive posture, ceding the initiative, and often paying the ultimate price in aircraft and pilots lost. And historians later noted that this combination of engineering excellence, pilot skill, and psychological impact was unprecedented in the air war over Europe, creating a plane that was feared not only for what it could do mechanically, but for how it reshaped human behavior in combat, instilling fear, hesitation, and respect in the men who had been trained to dominate the skies. And by 1944, the Mustang had cemented itself as the aircraft that would define Allied air superiority, turning the tide of the European air war, protecting bombers, decimating enemy fighters, and leaving a legacy of terror, admiration, and historical significance that would resonate long after the war ended, because in every dogfight, every strafing run, and every high-altitude interception, the Mustang was more than metal, and fuel it was the embodiment of relentless pursuit, tactical ingenuity, and unyielding American courage. And for the Luftwaffe aces who faced it, it was the single greatest airborne adversary of the war, a hunter of unparalleled skill, speed, and deadly precision, whose shadow over the European theater would haunt German pilots until the very last day of combat. Early sketches of the P-51 Mustang, blueprints overlaid on factory floors. The story of the P-51 Mustang begins not in the skies of Europe, but in the factories of the United States and the workshops of Britain, where engineers faced a critical challenge: create a fighter that could escort bombers deep into enemy territory, combine speed, maneuverability, and firepower, and withstand the brutal conditions of long-range aerial combat. Because the Allied bombing campaign had reached a crisis point by 1942, with B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators sustaining catastrophic losses against German fighters and anti-aircraft fire. And the solution required not only technical innovation but strategic foresight. And the result was the North American Aviation NA-73X prototype, designed initially to meet a British requirement for a lightweight, agile fighter capable of long-range operations. And although early versions were powered by Allison engines, which limited high-altitude performance, the introduction of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine transformed the Mustang into a world-class hunter, granting it unprecedented speed, climb rates, and maneuverability at altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet, allowing it to match or exceed the capabilities of the Luftwaffe's Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s. And this combination of American engineering and British adaptation created a fighter that could strike fear into experienced German pilots, because it was faster in level flight, more agile in turning engagements, and capable of escorting bombers from England all the way to Berlin and back, a range that previous Allied fighters simply could not achieve. And as production ramped up across the United States, the Mustang began entering service with the USAAF's 8th and 9th Air Forces, where its pilots quickly learned to exploit the aircraft's strengths, combining high-altitude, speed, diving attacks, and tight formation coordination to dominate engagements. And the Mustang's introduction coincided with critical operations in 1943 and 1944, including the bombing campaigns over the Ruhr, Berlin, and other industrial centers, where Allied bombers were previously vulnerable to concentrated Luftwaffe fighter attacks. And the Mustang's arrival changed the calculus entirely, because German pilots now faced a foe capable of reaching their formations with superior speed, engaging with deadly precision, and maintaining altitude and energy advantages throughout the engagement. And beyond technical specifications, the aircraft's performance allowed Allied commanders to experiment with new tactics, such as the fighter sweep and long-range bomber escort, ensuring that every sortie had both offensive and defensive potential. And pilots found that the Mustang's maneuverability allowed them to exploit weaknesses in the Luftwaffe's formation, execute hit-and-run attacks, and disengage when necessary, forcing German pilots into reactive stances that often resulted in costly mistakes. And the psychological advantage of the Mustang became apparent almost immediately, because its appearance in the sky was a symbol of inevitability for the Luftwaffe, signaling that no matter the altitude, the numbers, or the tactical plan, the Mustang could and would intervene. And this perception of invincibility amplified fear and hesitation among even the most experienced German aces, who had previously relied on superior training, experience, and aircraft to maintain dominance in the skies over Europe. And as the Mustang entered service in increasing numbers, combined with the rigorous training of American pilots in energy management, formation tactics, and gunnery accuracy, Luftwaffe intelligence reports began to document the growing threat, noting that P-51 pilots were aggressive, disciplined, and able to adapt mid-flight to dynamic combat conditions, making the Mustang not just a physical adversary but a psychological one, because every encounter reinforced the narrative that the Allies now had an aircraft capable of dictating the terms of combat, challenging traditional Luftwaffe doctrine, and undermining German morale. And this combination of engineering excellence, tactical flexibility, and pilot training created a multiplier effect on the battlefield, turning missions that had once been suicidal into calculated operations where bombers could reach targets with reduced losses. And every kill claimed by a Mustang pilot further strengthened the aircraft's fearsome reputation, as German pilots recounted stories of near-impossible escapes, sudden dives from above, and relentless pursuit across the European skies. And beyond the technical and tactical factors, the Mustang's range and fuel efficiency played a critical role in reshaping strategic planning, because it allowed Allied forces to project air power deep into the Reich, escorting bombers for hundreds of miles while retaining sufficient energy to engage enemy fighters at critical junctures. And the combination of speed, firepower, and psychological dominance forced the Luftwaffe to adapt hastily, often deploying interceptors under disadvantageous conditions, which led to catastrophic losses. And as reports of these encounters circulated through German air units, aces began to note the recurring pattern. The Mustang could outclimb, outdive, outmaneuver, and outshoot. And every engagement created a cascading effect of fear and uncertainty, because even highly trained pilots were vulnerable to the Mustang's combination of tactical innovation and relentless aggression. And historians now recognize that the P-51's design, coupled with its deployment and the skill of its pilots, created a force multiplier that decisively shifted the balance of air superiority in favor of the Allies, transforming the European air war from a defensive struggle into an offensive campaign dominated by long-range, high-performance fighter operations. And the aircraft's legacy was cemented not only by its statistics, kill ratios, and bomber survival rates, but by the terror and respect it inspired in those who faced it, because the Mustang represented the merging of technology, strategy, and human skill into an unstoppable aerial predator, capable of changing the course of battles and reshaping the psychology of aerial warfare. And as more Mustangs entered service, Luftwaffe pilots began to confront an undeniable reality. The skies that had once been theirs to dominate were now a hunting ground for a superior machine flown by relentless, adaptable, and highly trained American pilots. And the Mustang's very presence forced German commanders to reconsider tactics, deployments, and training priorities, ultimately highlighting the decisive role that engineering, innovation, and tactical integration play in modern air combat, and setting the stage for the dramatic dogfights, heroics, and stories of fear and survival that would define the remainder of the European air war and cement the P-51 Mustang's reputation as one of the most feared aircraft of World War II. Smoke-filled skies over Europe, P-51 Mustangs diving and weaving among enemy aircraft, tracers streaking across the air as 1944 unfolded. The skies over Europe became a battlefield of unprecedented intensity, a deadly chessboard where every maneuver could mean life or death. And it was in this crucible of fire and steel that the true power of the P-51 Mustang revealed itself, transforming ordinary bomber escort missions into high-stakes cat-and-mouse hunts that tested the courage, skill, and endurance of every pilot involved. And for the Luftwaffe, the stakes could not have been higher, because each day brought new encounters with a foe that defied expectation and reshaped strategy, forcing aces who had survived countless engagements against Spit, Bf-109s, and FW-190s to confront a machine that could outturn, outshoot, and outlast them in ways they had never experienced before. And the first reports from German squadrons detailed a terrifying pattern. P-51 pilots could strike from extreme altitudes, dive at blistering speeds, execute precise turns to gain positional advantage, and then disengage almost instantly, leaving Luftwaffe pilots struggling to regain control of the fight. And it wasn't just the Mustang's mechanical superiority that created panic, it was the psychological weight of knowing that at any moment, a formation of these relentless hunters could appear from above, flanking from the sides, or intercepting from behind. And every bomber escort mission became a high-wire act where precision, timing, and nerve were tested to their limits. Because German pilots quickly realized that conventional tactics often failed against the Mustang, and the aircraft's combination of range, firepower, and maneuverability allowed Allied pilots to dictate the terms of engagement, forcing the Luftwaffe into defensive positions, ceding the initiative, and suffering mounting losses. And in dogfights over the skies of the Ruhr, Berlin, and Normandy, seasoned aces recounted how the Mustang's presence alone could disrupt formations, break morale, and turn what should have been routine missions into deadly trials, where split-second decisions determined survival. And the casualty reports confirmed a grim reality. The P-51 was systematically reshaping the air war, not just through its technical superiority, but through its ability to instill fear, pressure, and uncertainty into the minds of those who confronted it. Because the Mustang did not fight conventionally, it hunted, pursued, and exploited every weakness. And every engagement reinforced its legendary status, as pilots on both sides recorded instances of Mustangs diving through flak-laden skies, strafing enemy airfields, intercepting bombers, and engaging interceptors with relentless precision, creating a cascade of confusion and losses that the Luftwaffe struggled to mitigate. And the psychological impact on German aces cannot be overstated, because these were men trained to dominate the skies. Yet they found themselves outmatched, outmaneuvered, and forced into positions where the odds of survival were dramatically reduced. And these encounters were not isolated incidents, but repeated, systemic demonstrations of the Mustang's capabilities, as the aircraft's speed, roll rate, climb rate, and firepower combined to create an almost predatory effect, hunting enemy aircraft with methodical efficiency while simultaneously protecting the bombers they were assigned to escort. And eyewitness accounts from surviving Luftwaffe pilots described the terror of seeing Mustangs dive from above, guns blazing, forcing evasive maneuvers that disrupted formations, separated units, and left pilots exposed to further attacks. And the combination of tactical ingenuity, superior engineering, and relentless aggression transformed aerial combat into a new kind of warfare, one that required rethinking engagement rules, energy management, and even survival instincts. Because the Mustang had rewritten the playbook, and every sortie over Europe became a testament to its dominance. And as the Allies pressed deeper into Germany, the Mustang's range allowed them to escort bombers on missions previously considered too dangerous. And this operational flexibility meant that German pilots faced relentless pressure on multiple fronts, often engaging in dogfights that stretched from dawn to dusk, across hundreds of miles, exhausting both men and machines. And the results were staggering. Luftwaffe losses mounted, morale faltered, and experienced aces who had survived years of combat now faced an opponent that could strike with surgical precision, evade retaliation, and dictate the flow of battle at will. And this combination of physical capability and psychological dominance created a multiplier effect on the battlefield, reinforcing the Mustang's reputation as the aircraft that could not be underestimated. Because every kill, every successful escort, and every failed German interception added to a growing mythos of invincibility, a perception that elevated the Mustang from mere machine to symbol of American ingenuity, courage, and air superiority. And these dogfights, chronicled in mission reports, diaries, and post-war interviews, illustrate the relentless pressure the Mustang exerted on the Luftwaffe, forcing changes in tactics, formations, and strategy. Because no longer could German commanders rely on superior experience or training alone. The Mustang forced a recalibration of everything from defensive patterns to fighter deployment, because it could appear anywhere, at any time, and exploit every weakness with deadly efficiency. And in recounting these battles, historians note the psychological impact on German pilots, who described feelings of dread, panic, and helplessness in the face of an enemy that seemed to anticipate every move, as well as the physical danger posed by a machine capable of sustained high-speed engagements, devastating firepower, and the endurance to escort bombers across Europe and still fight effectively upon arrival. And these combined factors cemented the P-51 Mustang as the aircraft that changed the air war, instilled fear, and earned the lasting respect of friend and foe alike. Because the dogfights over the skies of Europe were no longer even, they were dominated by the relentless, agile, and deadly presence of a machine whose legend would endure for decades. And every surviving Luftwaffe ace from these encounters remembers the Mustang as a symbol of unstoppable force, tactical brilliance, and psychological dominance that redefined aerial combat forever. Dark clouds over European skies, German fighter formations gathering, smoke trails from flak bursts, sun glinting off Mustang wings just when the P-51 Mustang seemed unstoppable. The Luftwaffe, battered yet resilient, began to adapt. And the skies over Europe became a theater of desperation, innovation, and lethal strategy. because German commanders recognized that conventional tactics could no longer counter the Mustang's dominance, and they devised new methods to challenge the aircraft's supremacy, experimenting with massed fighter formations, high-speed ambushes, low-level attacks, and coordinated sweeps that forced Mustang pilots to engage under increasingly hazardous conditions. And the Germans deployed highly experienced Bf-109 and Fw-190 squadrons in tightly coordinated groups, designed to bait Mustang pilots into traps over forests, river valleys, industrial cities, and areas heavily defended by anti-aircraft flak, taking advantage of terrain, limited visibility, and intelligence reports to create tactical windows of opportunity. And yet even with these adjustments, the Mustang's combination of speed, range, maneuverability, and pilot skill allowed Allied pilots to retain initiative in most engagements, exploiting the Luftwaffe's mistakes with lethal precision. And German aces quickly discovered that the Mustang could dive faster, climb higher, outearn almost every interceptor, and disengage at will, forcing pilots to rely on deception, cunning, and aggression just to survive, because a single error could lead to being isolated, outflanked, or destroyed. And every engagement tested the limits of human endurance and aircraft capability, pushing men and machines to breaking points. And this escalating cat-and-mouse dynamic transformed aerial combat into a psychological as well as physical battle, because pilots on both sides faced extreme pressure, split-second decisions, and the constant threat of death. As formations separated, tracers streaked across the sky, and smoke trails marked the path of destruction below. And every encounter reinforced the Mustang's lethal reputation, because German pilots, even seasoned aces, were forced into defensive positions that had once been dominated by them. And the Luftwaffe's countermeasures created moments of drama, tension, and chaos, with dogfights erupting over forests, rivers, cities, and industrial complexes, where multiple aircraft engaged simultaneously, each pilot executing precise maneuvers to survive, evade, and strike back. And Allied pilots reported near misses, daring dives, and multiple simultaneous engagements, maintaining formation integrity while systematically reducing enemy numbers. And the psychological impact of these twists was immense, because the Luftwaffe, despite preparation, training, and experience, could no longer dictate combat terms. And each sortie reinforced the perception that Mustang pilots were relentless, adaptable, and capable of exploiting the smallest mistake, turning defensive maneuvers into catastrophic losses. And historians later noted that the Luftwaffe's adaptation efforts, while clever and tactically sound, often played into the Mustang's strengths, because the aircraft's superior speed, climb rate, energy retention, and firepower allowed pilots to disengage, reposition, and strike again, converting ambushes into traps for the attackers. And this forced the Luftwaffe to continually expend resources, pilots, and aircraft at increasing cost, while Allied air superiority continued to solidify. And the twist deepened when German pilots attempted innovative tactics like head-on attacks, night interceptions, coordinated flak suppression, and feints, only to find that the Mustang's versatility and pilot proficiency neutralized these moves in most engagements, creating frustration, confusion, and panic. And the combination of relentless aggression, technological advantage, and tactical ingenuity led to a cascading effect on Luftwaffe effectiveness, because as experienced pilots were lost, replacements had to fly missions with minimal training, higher risk, and under extreme psychological strain. And the Mustang's presence amplified this effect, because pilots knew that every sortie could be their last, that every engagement with a Mustang required perfect execution, and that even a minor miscalculation could result in catastrophic loss. And these factors contributed not only to physical attrition but to profound psychological stress, as aces described feelings of dread, panic, and helplessness in encounters with aircraft that seemed to anticipate their every move, strike with deadly accuracy, and disengage almost instantly, forcing German pilots into reactive, defensive patterns that further eroded initiative. And mission reports, diaries, and after-action accounts describe chaotic, high-stakes engagements where pilots on both sides fought at the limits of human skill, experiencing moments of exhilaration, terror, and survival instinct as every maneuver could determine life or death. And the Luftwaffe's countermeasures, while innovative, were insufficient to overcome the Mustang's combination of technology, pilot skill, and operational flexibility, leading to repeated failures, mounting losses, and ultimately, accelerating the collapse of German air power. because the Mustang continued to escort bombers deep into enemy territory, engage fighters with precision, and inflict heavy attrition that German commanders could not offset. And this dynamic created a psychological and strategic domino effect, as each successful engagement boosted Allied confidence, disrupted German planning, and forced commanders to stretch resources thin, deploy inexperienced pilots, and accept higher attrition. And the Mustang's influence was not limited to immediate tactical victories. It reshaped aerial combat doctrine, influenced future fighter design, and became a symbol of technological superiority, psychological dominance, and relentless efficiency. Because in every dogfight, strafing run, and escort mission, the Mustang demonstrated that victory depended on mastery of speed, maneuvering, firepower, and decision-making, creating a legacy of fear, respect, and awe among both pilots and historians alike. Because even when the Luftwaffe struck back with skill, ingenuity, and courage, the Mustang consistently adapted, responded, and reasserted control over the skies, ensuring that the legend of this aircraft would endure for generations, as a machine that not only dominated physical space but also the minds and morale of those who dared to challenge it, proving that technological innovation, tactical brilliance, and human skill could combine to create a weapon whose impact extended far beyond the immediate battlefield, shaping the outcome of the war and leaving an indelible mark on aviation history, forever remembered as the relentless hunter that forced even the most skilled Luftwaffe pilots to respect, fear, and ultimately yield to the unmatched capabilities of the P-51 Mustang.